Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Okay, guys. Again, if we revisit the initial response I shared with you guys when I learned about this shooting in Las Vegas, in the first instance, my attention was drawn to the number 32 in the article, and from off the bat, I'd from that had gleaned and came to the conclusion that Freemasonry had their grubby fingerprints all over this particular false flag that has taken place in Las Vegas, and that I also maybe soon after that concluded that it was to curb, potentially, to possibly curb the gun laws in the United States of America and to disarm the public, which does predominantly and substantially own firearms. And this is in anticipation of the World War III that they've got set up, which they're looking to instigate very soon. And we've discussed the Hegelian dialectic and how all of that basically works out and the dynamics of that. Anyway, you'll see the finger pointing towards the number 320. Again, 32 seems to be quite prominent throughout this whole debacle. You might say, okay, well, there's a zero there. And what does a zero stand for? Because it's not just 3, 2 on its own. But in the occult, if you study the mystery religions, then the zero literally stands for exactly that, nothing. And they usually drop that number. Now, you'll say, well, how did you come to that conclusion? It's basically how they work in mystery religions and the occult and Freemasonry. They have a language in and of itself. A lot of it is in numerology, in numbers, but also in architecture, in symbolism, in I guess steeped in the mystery religious doctrines as well, and all of that amalgamated creates a language which they communicate in. So it's not just a set of numbers, or it's not just astrology, it's not just these false deities or the occult doctrine or architecture, but all of that combined is a language in which they communicate, subhanAllah, and you become discerning once you kind of try to see those patterns. And I'll just show you the evidence for that. Just to again support my claim. I mean, it's not just something that I'm pulling out of the bag. But here you go. Now, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, again, I'm just very quickly going to maybe just impress on this, is the this woman's one of the peers in the IMF, and she basically, let's just go back to who the IMF are. They basically loan money to countries, and it's a way to swindle and steal the country's resources by making them, burdening them with in debt. So they can't. It's basically cyclical, and they can't just get out of the debt because they're always paying the interest. And subhanallah, it's through by virtue of interest that the colonial powers, especially Great Britain at the time, had dismantled the influence and the power of the Ottoman Khilafah over the world. And it's ajib, it's very interesting that riba would be the means through which Iblis Lanatullahi alayhi, and it's not actually, I guess it makes perfect sense. He understood Lanatullahi alayhi, the influence of riba, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's protection over the ummah will be taken away, and how he can then, by virtue of this, invoke the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the ummah, so that he can then be successful at what he has been planning since and way before that, subhanallah. And one of the ways in which, once we entered into this agreement and we took this loan, then soon after that the Ottoman Khilafah was dismantled, and the protection evidently was gone of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the ummah, because our leaders, our guides, the responsible ones, had fallen into error, and a grave one at that, subhanallah. You know, the final ayats of the Quran, as I understand and believe from our beloved ulama ikram, they are not actually al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islam dina, but rather the ayats that were revealed, the final ayats, were basically on riba. There seems to be quite a general misconception in the Ummah, but I guess the ulama ikram are intimately aware of this, that they were in fact Ya ayyuhallazina amanu taqullaha wa zaru ma baqiya min al-riba in kuntum mu'minin. Subhanallah. These ayats and the ones that followed, subhanallah, were the final ayats, and this is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along with his beloved Prophet Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wasallam, declare war upon those individuals who engage in riba. When the Khilafah itself was engaging in riba, subhanallah, the protection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala left, and we've been suffering as a consequence. So that was the final nail in the coffin, I guess, for us. And it's interesting how the IMF has spread their tentacles all over the globe through their central banks, and you'll see that, and that's a good litmus test to see exactly where a country and their leadership lies if the central banks are indeed operating in those particular countries. And to be honest with you, there's probably one country that's left that isn't operating with central banks. I'll leave that for you guys to research. Anyway, this going back, I'm sorry I went off on a tangent, but I just want to draw your attention back to this lady from the IMF and how she talks about the number 0 in the occult and the significance of dropping it. So you'll see exactly why I was dropping the 0 after the 32 in that particular image, where the address of the brother of the shooter was 320. I dropped the 0, and again we came back to 32, which is where this all spiraled from the outset, when I basically saw the article and just off the bat had noticed that.
Thank you so much. Merci beaucoup. As you can tell, I do as I'm told, and I thought I had to stand up at the time when my immediate predecessor would sit down, and clearly I failed. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me with you. I would like to thank the National Press Club, and especially President Angela Grilling-Keane, for not only inviting me to this prestigious venue, but essentially presenting the outline of what I want to talk to you about now. So it's as if we had prepared that together, which we have not. Now let me first of all, of course, begin by wishing you all a Happy New Year. I guess it's still time to do that, given that we are just exactly halfway through between our Western New Year and the Lunar New Year, which will loom in a few weeks' time. I think it's also appropriate to wish ourselves a Happy New Year, given what I would like to talk to you about, which has to do with the global economy and what we should expect for 2014. Now I'm going to test you numerology skills by asking you to think about the magic 7. Okay? Most of you will know that 7 is quite a number in all sorts of themes, religions, and I'm sure that you can compress numbers as well. So, if we think about 2014, all right, I'm just giving you 2014, you drop the 0, 14, 2 times 7. Okay, that's just by way of example, and we're going to carry on. So 2014 will be a milestone and hopefully a magic year in many respects. It will mark the 100th anniversary of the First World War back in 1914. It will mark the 70th anniversary, drop the 0, 7, of the Bretton Woods Conference that actually gave birth to the IMF. And it will be the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. 25th. Okay. It will also mark the 7th anniversary of the financial market jitters that quickly turned into the greatest global economic calamity since the Great Depression. The crisis still lingers. Yet, optimism is in the air. We've left the deep freeze behind us, and the horizon looks just a bit brighter. So my hope and my wish for 2014 is that after those 7 miserable years, weak and fragile, we have 7 strong years. Now, I don't know whether the G7 will have anything to do with it, or whether it will be the G20.
Now, the astute of you would have noticed that she mentioned 7 3 times. Those of her compatriots who were basically sat in the audience understood the occult language and the double speak and hence why you heard them laugh in the background, because 777 is the number, according to the occult, the number of divine. We discussed how this year was the Jewish year 5777, and how in previous vlogs, I guess, we've discussed that and the significance of that number. And again, with Donald Trump and his inauguration, and again, during his inauguration, he was 70 years, 7 months, and maybe 7 days or something like that when he was inaugurated. These numbers obviously have some sort of significance to the occult. We don't really pay any credence to that. But again, like I said, this is how you basically come to maybe perhaps glean who and what sort of dark forces are behind what we're seeing unfolding. It's almost a surreal reality that they've created, and most of the ummah, subhanallah, most of the ummah are basically buying it as the gospel. You know, it's for them, it's set in stone. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect and guide us. Again, jazakallahu khairan wa jazakallahu for your time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.